At this point, I must declare my position. Before joining Welsh Water this year, I did work for the Welsh Government in the team devising future agricultural policy. Technically, I still work for Welsh Government. I'm here with Welsh Water on temporary secondment. But I thought I should acknowledge that. And I should also acknowledge the draft water regulations that Welsh Government have proposed. I'm not planning to talk about that today, not because I'm avoiding a difficult conversation, but I'm not the most up to date on that area at the moment. And I wanted instead to concentrate on the positive steps that people can take, not just because the regulation or the funding schemes require it, but because there are real benefits to farming and in this instance to water also. So I'll just mention a little bit more about my work specifically, and I hope that I'm going to be able to share my screen. So as I said, David Ashford, I'm the Programme Manager for the Brecon Beacon Mega Catchment. If you can, next slide, please, David. I'll assume that's moved on. So a really quick bit of context here. I'll just run through our catchments and our water quality issues just quickly before I come on to the more positive aspects, the more proactive project aspects that I wanted to talk about in a bit more detail. Next slide, David, showing the map of Wales. So we have 116 drinking water catchments across Wales. Those drinking water catchments you can see there, mostly rivers and reservoirs. The small red dots that you can see are groundwaters. Those water catchments altogether, they take up about 11,000 square kilometres, supplying a huge amount of water every day to our customers. But each of those catchments have their different characteristics. A lot of commonality, as you can imagine, but different combinations of soils, of land use, of communities, so a whole host of different aspects that impact on the water quality in those catchments. And next slide, David, please. And in those catchments, I've listed there a selection of some of the water quality issues that we experience. They're not in any particular order there. Most of them probably seem quite obvious. Sediment, for example, that's precious topsoil that's being washed off fields into watercourses. Taste and odor compounds, that is an issue around algae. It's not a problem that is an issue for human health, but it does mean that sometimes we get that kind of earthy, musty taste in our water supplies that we don't like in our glass of water. Colour from peatlands, Cryptosporidium. Crypto is a parasitic little bug that is passed on in the feces of wild animals and livestock and humans as well. So crypto is an issue that we have to deal with in some of our catchments also. All of our catchments are different. Like I said, all these things happen in different combinations. I don't show you this list to raise any concern. I'm not trying to scare anybody. We treat water to deal with all of these issues before that water reaches your tap. But like I said, a lot of effort goes, a lot of energy and a lot of chemicals go into treating that water. We have 62 treatment works across Wales. These are drinking water treatments. Sorry, next slide, David, please. We have 62 water treatment works. These are different to the wastewater treatment works. The treatment capability is varied to deal with the different combinations of issues, as I've just mentioned. But what's happening more and more is that the emphasis is shifting towards looking at the water in the environment before it even reaches the treatment works. And by trying to reduce or avoid some of these risks in the environment as much as possible, it means that water that we are treating is of a manageable and consistent quality as possible. And that helps build resilience in not only the water supply itself, but also our treatment works. Next slide, please, Dad. Just very quick comment on this one. Welsh Water 2050. This was a consultation exercise that we carried out 3 years ago, the result of which was 18 strategic responses that the organisation decided that we needed to invest in to get our organisation from here to 2050. Strategic response number 1 was the safeguarding of clean drinking water through catchment management. So that's the business really recognising that the more we can do for water in the environment, the less that we have to spend on chemicals and energy later on, which is of benefit to everybody also. Next slide, please, David, to the map. So 50% of the water that we supply to our customers every day comes from this cluster of catchments in the Brecon Beacons, this really important cluster of water catchments. This map is not great, I'm afraid. I need to create a better one. Historically, these catchments were considered in isolation, but obviously they're in such close proximity, and people, livestock, nature, weather do not stop at those topographical boundaries. So it makes sense for us to manage the area as a whole, hence the mega catchment. I don't have time to go through the whole story of how we got to where we are today, but the mega catchment has just moved from concept into a live program as of this spring. And I'm now in the process of devising a program of activities that we'll be undertaking over the next 5 years or so. But we have created a vision and a mission statement and a number of goals to help shape our activity going forwards. But before I do, I want to reiterate, this is not a statutory designation. You can see the map there, the water catchments. I cannot state carefully enough that this is not a statutory designation. There are no new rules or regulations or anything attached to this. This is an opportunity just to focus our engagement and our ideas in that geographical location. So the people operating and living within those communities, they're not subject to any different set of rules because we've designated this Brecon Beacons mega catchment. Next slide, please, David. So on the screen there, hopefully you're just looking at the vision and the mission statement that we crafted to help us to shape our activities going forwards. I'll just read the mission statement out. So to collaborate with communities and other organisations to develop innovative, proactive and preventative ways to protect and enhance water supplies, as well as benefiting nature, business and our well-being for the long term. A big emphasis on collaboration there for several reasons. Firstly, we don't have all the answers. Secondly, we are looking for multiple other benefits that we can try and realise at the same time as water quality issues. And also trying to realise these benefits at a landscape scale. There have been some comments earlier on today in the other sessions about the importance of working at a landscape scale if we are to realise some of these benefits that we are trying to deliver. And then on the next slide, please, David, this is the last slide from me. This is a number of goals that we've written, again, to help us craft our kind of activities going forwards. I'm not going to go into all of those, I'll just pick up a few points. The first one perhaps is the most important. So using preventative and proactive management to improve raw water quality. So what that means is that under that goal, we are developing, I should say we're fairly early days. So we have a number of projects at scoping stage, but for example, we have 1 or 2 projects involving groups of farmers. We have one group of farmers near Brecon. With those, we are testing the creation of, or the designation, I should say, on their land of spread and no spread zones. So for example, using hydrological pathway mapping to work out where water is running across those fields and where it is not running, and then using that information to devise some spread and no spread zones, not only so that those inputs or whatever are not being lost to watercourses and causing us problems in the water, but also as an extra efficiency for the farmer as well, so that money is not being wasted on that muck or that fertilizer or whatever. And then trying some new software packages to help monitor and measure that as we go along. And really the goal here is that hopefully we'll have a package that has been tested by farmers for farmers, and once we're at the end of the trial and we're in a position to roll that out to other groups of farmers, we'll have something that hopefully is more palatable to groups of farmers, given that it's been designated, being that it's been devised by farmers themselves, not by government, not by industry. It really has been tested on by farmers on real farms. So, like I said, a number of other activities at scoping stage at the moment. So what I want, that's the end of my slides. Thank you, David. You can stop sharing your screen. So I do have a requirement from this conference. I've seen a few comments about what comes out of conferences like this and others. Are they just a talking shop or not? I've come with a requirement. I'm trying to flush out any good ideas possible to from my fellow speakers this afternoon, from the other sessions, but also from yourselves as we start kind of seeing comments and questions later. What ideas can I perhaps apply to some on-the-ground trials throughout the Brecon Beacons, but also ideas for providing the support or the information sharing mechanisms that we may need to enable people to make changes or to alter their farm management. If indeed any alteration is needed. Like I said earlier, not all activity results in negative impacts. I can't say that enough. But that is enough from me. I'm joined by 3 other speakers, like I said. I think it's vital we have the farmer's perspective in these conversations, and later on we'll be hearing from beef and sheep farmer Geraint Powell, then young farmer and student Meg Powell, no relation to each other as far as I know. But firstly, I thought it'd be useful to bring in a perspective from outside of Wales. Lisa Harrowsmith is Land and Property Lead Surveyor at Yorkshire Water. Unlike Welsh Water, Yorkshire Water own much more land. They own about a total of around 70,000 acres of predominantly upland land in their catchments. They've been creating their Beyond Nature initiative since 2016, and Lisa is focusing on supporting the farm tenants to optimise the value from their land, from capturing water through farming livestock, providing a home for nature, and delivering natural flood management, and a number of other outcomes that Lisa will go into in more detail in a moment. The Beyond Nature initiative is also one of the key delivery mechanisms for Yorkshire Water's land strategy, Better Land, Better Lives. I thought it'd be useful to learn what is happening in Yorkshire Water to see what lessons we might be able to apply here in the Welsh context. So, Lisa, over to you, please.
Okay, thanks very much for inviting me. I'll try sharing my screen now, and hopefully you'll be able to see that. Can everybody see that one?
Looks fine from here.
Right. Okay, so thanks very much for inviting me to speak here. I'll just give you a bit of an overview of what our Beyond Nature initiative is. So Yorkshire Water's estate, land is our most important natural asset, or one of them, and we own over 70,000 acres of land, predominantly upland catchments, peatland and blanket bog, and they're managed under 250 agricultural lettings. So that's from traditional agricultural long-term lettings to some short-term grazing licenses. The primary reason why we own the land is to safeguard water quality and attenuation, so protecting and enhancing our raw water sources, but also proactive flood and drought management, offering some resilience there. The land can also generate significant value through carbon storage and sequestration, helping to mitigate impacts of climate change, also biodiversity, soil health and wildlife, but also social and recreational and economic opportunities from the land. So Beyond Nature, a new approach. In 2015, long-standing tenants asked me to go and visit them and told me that they wanted to retire, that they had no successors, that their children weren't wanting to take it on. So it gave us an opportunity to consider alternatives for managing the farm, and some of those were ruled out quite quickly. It's over 2,200 acres of moorland, 2/3 of which is designated as a SSSI special protection area. So things like dense forestry or renewable energy, those sorts of land uses were quickly ruled out. We did recognise that there was a whole range of values to society that this land could offer, though, and so I put together an invitation to partner document. So rather than just doing a straight let by tender, it was inviting people to come and partner Yorkshire Water to deliver some objectives that I'd set out, so water quality, natural environment, farming and management, society and reputational type objectives that we wanted to get from the farm. And so we invited people to put their proposal, what would their vision for the farm be, and how would they deliver some of these objectives that we had. And after a fairly rigorous process, it went to a young local farmer called Jonathan, and he had a dream to make a difference. And so he moved into the farm in September 2016, and it's been a great success, but it's a never-ending project. It's continually ongoing. I called it Beyond Nature, but we've since developed the concept into an initiative, which is now one of the leading initiatives delivering our land strategy. And so we're applying the learning and experience that we're continually getting across our whole estate. It is a bit busy, I won't go through it all, but the vision is demonstrating Yorkshire Water's estate as an exemplar in sustainable land management to optimise multiple eco values. And so there's 9 themes or values here, not in any order, although arguably we would say water quality was number 1 and everything else was joint second. It is about optimising these values and not going into one. For instance, if you were to go in and maximise biodiversity, you might not have a farming business, and for social, you might exclude people in order to maximise biodiversity. So it's about looking at a range of these themes, which all interact and overlap each other, and optimising the overall value that we can get from land. The approach is changing the normal tenancy model. We're letting land on longer term tenancies where we've had farm business tenancies that have come to an end of a term. We've re-let them to the same tenants for say 25 years, taking them to retirement. And that new long-term farm business tenancy has a beyond nature management plan with it. It's a management plan that we work together with. It's not Yorkshire Water dictating to the tenant what we want. It's a plan of how we work together to deliver a range of initiatives and objectives that support both of our businesses. Alongside that, we'll provide any extra environmental and business support and advice to help deliver these. And we've already had tenants who've been able to go to their bank manager and say, look, this demonstrates the commitment between the landlord and tenant. We've got a joint plan to deliver the best for our businesses, and they've had extra bank support. It shows sort of viability and resilience with that, and when they're making decisions and diversifying. Quickly run through some examples of the sort of things that we're already doing. So these are sort of issues and remedies. Water quality and flood attenuation. Here we've got things like a wildlife and sediment pond that's newly created. Already got oyster catchers, curlews and so on nesting around there. Multiple benefits to the farm, and also water quality. Tree planting on grass. We've also got a target to plant 1 million trees by 2028. So we're planting a lot of trees, but it's planting the right tree in the right place for the right reason. Other natural flood management works, such as ditch profiling, slowing the flow. There we've got some timber sediment dams on the moor. They stand out a bit now, but they will pull water behind and disappear into the environment. Carbon and climate change. We manage a whole range of land, so grassland, peatland, woodland, that help store and sequester carbon. Dissolved organic carbon, that's that sort of tea-coloured water, is our issue from the uplands. It's expensive to treat, so that's what we're trying to reduce. So we reduce then the sort of chemical dosing and energy required to treat water. So the sorts of things we're doing is grip blocking, like you can see there, with just a mini digger and sort of going along with peat dams. Sphagnum moss is fantastic natural sponge. So sphagnum inoculation and planting plug plants to increase that on the moors, protecting our internationally important blanket bog. Wetter is better as far as we're concerned, and again tree planting, and that was some trees that were extending existing woodland planted by some volunteers. Biodiversity, livestock fencing. Here this moorland's managed in sort of 6 grazing areas with a stocking calendar throughout the year, so that helps with that. Bringing in native breeds of cattle, graze differently to sheep and help that sward mosaic. Hay meadow restoration, took seed from a local donor site, another Yorkshire Water farm, spread it as green hay within the hour. So this is a meadow that will improve each year over time. Generally wetland creation areas and management of rushy pastures. Here creating some scrapes for waders, curlews. They're on the red list for birds of conservation concern, but we've got some really good numbers of those on our estate. Farming and sporting, we're predominantly sheep farming in our upland areas, but are getting an increasing number of cattle where it fits in, and the cryptosporidium risk that David mentioned before. We're looking where cows can and can't go, or undertaking works to mitigate any risks. We don't own all the sporting rights over our estate, so some shoots are private, or some we do own and we let out. So it's collaborative working together to manage land. Here it's both the sporting and agricultural tenant working together to do some dry stone wall restoration. That was a field barn on a moor. We put a roof on it. That's 2,500 acres at the other end, from opposite end from the main farm. So just putting a roof and a door on is a useful asset for the farmer. Some of our farmers have had external business advice through the Prince's Countryside Fund, and we're carrying on and providing some more business advice, and also supporting tenant diversification. There was a derelict building we did some structural works on, and the tenant turned it into a cafe with a wood-fired pizza oven. Social and recreational. This is back at Humberston Bank Farm. We created the Upland Hub, converted a barn. It's got 2 large meeting rooms and a kitchen and small office. And so this is great for knowledge sharing for like-minded groups and events. There we had a family day. So there's an example. Children, get them to weigh dry moss, put it in some water, put it through a sieve, weigh it again. They love it, but it also brings in the sort of maths and then working out that, you know, it holds 10 times its weight in water. There we had a volunteer archaeological dig for 2 weeks at an abandoned village on the edge of one of our reservoir sites, and pulling together historical information. And there you can see we working in partnership, we constructed a sheep pinfold, and within there is set some of this information and stone benches for people to rest in, and improving signage for visitors. Another part of the Beyond Nature is the Next Generation Farming programme. So at level 1 we've created 3 education lessons on food and farming, habitats, and also countryside code. Get them when they're young, so they know how to act in the countryside. We've developed those lessons. We've just nearly finished filming, and lockdown 2 happened for us, so not quite there. Then those lessons will be available online for schools, and then when we get a bit more normal, hopefully we can start getting kids out back on the land. 2, we're looking at training and mentoring, working with sort of school leaver age and colleges, and looking at potential for offering work experience on the Beyond Nature farms or apprenticeships, maybe even heritage skills as well. 3 is like the starter farm, and we've got one. We've just been letting it out. We had 45 applications, and this was particularly targeted at a young farmer who will support with advice and training and mentoring from existing Beyond Nature farms. It's hard for the younger generation to get into farming, and historical tenancy legislation, land prices and so on, it's become a barrier for them getting in. So this is particularly to help somebody young set up their first farm. We'll work with them and support them throughout for that 5 years, and then we'll support them in trying to find another farm to move on to. So we're nearly at the process of selecting that farmer, and they'll be mentored by other existing Beyond Nature farmers. And then 4 is the existing Beyond Nature farmers. Opportunities for us: water quality, doing a lot more long-term and very localised water quality monitoring using our tenants and gamekeepers who are already on the land. That's what we want to do. Continue with the collaboration, which has been improving over the years with farmer stakeholders, policymakers, and then we can do that influencing, which we've already done with blanket bog strategy, peatland and tree strategies with government. Direct engagement and collaboration with the whole food supply chain, I think, is essential, and have mechanisms for equitable returns for farmers receiving a fair price for their produce. Looking at the whole supply chain and everybody working together. Boundaries, go beyond boundaries, whether it's management, ownership or area boundaries. Look at things landscape scale. And for us, the environment policy must recognise the services in the uplands. So a lot of these are on the edge of economic viability maybe, but what they deliver is immense for these landscapes, and that has to be recognised. Our new environmental land management schemes for England. This, I think, it's just essentially we need to learn from what's gone before. Got to be flexible and agile, and recognise those that are doing good things rather than because they're good they're not getting payments, and those that are doing things maybe badly do get payments. That's got to stop. And generally less bureaucracy and just practical, straightforward language, and not mountains and mountains of paperwork. Increase focus on water, carbon and soil, which I think there is will be, and use that as a baseline to develop further local priorities. Properly and effectively resourced advisors. We used to have really good local advisors, and now there's a lot less of them, and now farmers have to contact a central hub, which it's just not working, so they need to review that. Preserve the rural resilience, which I was saying about in the uplands. Funding mechanisms that allow people like Yorkshire Water to help our tenants in doing that moorland restoration, which can cost tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds. They don't have the ability to bankroll that, but at the moment the policy has changed, and we have to demonstrate it comes out of the tenant's bank account, not, for instance, Yorkshire Water's, and otherwise they won't fund it, or it's just mad. Promoting the establishment of local farmer groups. We've got some facilitation funds which are 3 years, which are fantastic networking, even if it's just a social or learning for sort of farmer to farmer. Need to encourage more of that. And then those other 2 points, probably getting into a bit more detail from the English side. So it's a bit of a rattle through, but that's from me. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lisa. I'm assuming that everybody else got to look at some lovely pictures. I'm still looking at a blank screen, unfortunately. So that's a shame. Really, Really interesting points there. I particularly like the bits about, you know, the optimization of multiple outcomes, and also some of those comments about young farmers receiving mentoring from more experienced farmers. I think that's a really useful tool as well going forward. I'm conscious of time and my kind of mess up at the beginning, so we need to rattle on, I'm afraid, and we'll save the questions for later. Next, we move on to Geraint Powell. Geraint farmed in the Cotswolds for many years and then moved to manage a sheep and beef unit near Hay a few years ago, applying the regenerative agriculture aspects he learned during his Nuffield scholarship. So many thanks, Geraint. Over to you.
Hello everyone, I'm assuming you can all hear me, so I'll carry on. So good afternoon everyone, and greetings from Gabalva Farm in the Wye Valley near Hay on Wye. I manage Gabalva for the Guest family. It's a 500-acre farm. We have a mixture of woodland, permanent grass, river meadows, and valley side permanent pasture. I was brought up near Brecon, where my parents still farm today, and up until 18 months ago, I spent 20 years on the Cotswolds farming arable, beef, and sheep for a large-scale unsubsidized farming business, which covered about 8,000 acres. I'm a 2017 Nuffield Scholar with the rather elaborate title of Sustainable Grazing Strategies that Meet Ecological Demands. I spent a little bit of time traveling the world, meeting regenerative farmers who are successful in balancing their social, ecological, and financial responsibilities. My report was published in September 2018 and can be found on the Nuffield International website. The major take-home message I took from my travels was quite a simple one, in that the most profitable place to keep a cow was where nature thrives. So Gabalva, we have a lot of things going on here. We have the pasture, we have the woodland, we have holiday cottages, peri-pear orchards, fishing, and pottery. We farm pedigree and commercial Angus cows, selling breeding stock, store cattle, some finished cattle into the commodity trade. And we also sell our 100% grass-fed beef direct to various hotels in England and here in Wales. Alongside the cattle, we run wool shedding sheep. These are bred pure to sell breeding stock, store, and finished lambs. So I'm very fortunate to be managing a farm where the owners share my long-term views of land use and animal production. And our goal for the farm is to harvest free solar energy to generate an optimum profit from high quality protein while improving ecosystem function with healthy animals and happy people. So that's our overall goal of the farm. That's our mission statement, if you were. So it's about healthy soil, healthy plants, healthy animals, healthy people. So what does this mean? Well, it means that we're committed to farming Gabalva as a 100% biodiversity managed area while increasing productivity, but that's aligned to natural metrics of production. So for me, it's a win-win situation where ecological improvements are an associated benefit of a more profitable livestock system. And as a farmer, why wouldn't you choose that? So our decisions are made by taking into account ecosystem function. So we're constantly assessing and testing our decisions against the water cycle, mineral cycle, harvesting sunlight, and biodiversity. And never thinking of these things in isolation, always thinking of them as a whole. And this goes for our grassland, for the hedges, the trees, our scrub, our water, everything all together is managed as one. I like to refer to this as re-farming, productivity and the environment happening in the same place, not one or the other. We can't afford this argument to be binary. It's going to take some very grown-up conversations, some strong political will, and joined-up thinking to reverse the serious issue in that our modern food systems completely undermine the ecology that we rely on. And a nation's ecology is a direct reflection of a nation's health. So on the farm here, we're actually aiming for an optimum output not a maximum output. So we're creating our own metrics of effectiveness. And we're not being drawn into the flawed metrics of industry expected efficiencies, which are usually devised by the market or the supply chain and are not really beneficial to me, the farmer. So it's about evaluating your resources and using them that best suits your farm and the system of farming that you choose. Because I'm just not interested in that constant input slog of spending and stress, you know, and these are symptoms of trying to outperform your environment. For me, the answer is to mimic nature and to produce a sustainable income over time. So soil health is at the foundation of everything we do here. We are not certified organic, but we have taken all of synthetics out of the system. So that includes artificial fertilizer, herbicides, and certain animal health products. To me, this is very much a financial decision as well as an ecological one. The return on investment of many of these inputs is poor, even when the externalities are not factored in. We are looking to promote a healthy soil food web with all the micro and macro organisms functioning properly. Synthetic inputs are damaging to soil biology. And as me being a farmer, why would I inflict damage on a workforce that is free? Because for the last 50 years, UK agriculture and world agriculture and this marvelous thing they call the Green Revolution has been hijacked by parasitic companies that have no agenda other than lining their own pockets. And I find that I like problem solving, and I find it very empowering when you can solve a problem on the farm without spending money. So what does this mean for water? Well, by protecting and nurturing soil biology, I can improve the physical properties of the soil and improve soil structure, infiltration rates, and water holding capacity. I want my land, or as I call it, my sponge, to hold as much water as possible. Again, this is a win-win for me. More grass growth, more resilience against dry times, and it has the associated benefits of preventing wet carpets further downstream. So a healthy soil can hold a huge amount of water. Every 1% increase in soil organic matter, that soil can hold an extra 200 tons of water per hectare. So soil organic matter can hold 20 times its own weight of water. So the potential here is huge. And I'm very keen to keep my soil and nutrients on the farm. At £10,000 an acre, it does seem a bit foolish to watch it wash away. I believe plant diversity is the missing piece of this jigsaw. We have too many monocultures or green deserts or single species ryegrass. The greater your plant species frequency and abundance, the bigger your carbon pump. So plants doing different things at different times throughout the year or throughout the growing season, catching sunlight, drawing down carbon, and releasing root exudates or carbohydrates into the soil to feed soil biology, which in turn feeds the plants. So this is, the start of the carbon cycle. So just to recap, for me, this is about soil health and plant diversity. The two things go together. So how do we do this on the farm? Well, our animals are crucial for delivering this. They are the ecosystem engineers, or I like to call them my mobile solar-powered bioreactors. So the grazing system here is planned around the recovery period of the plant. So I want plants to fully recover between grazings. I want to grow big plants that catch lots of sunlight, which have a big root structures that improve soil health and structure. Rest period also improves diversity. So it allows a plant to grow and express themselves. So in just one grazing season here, I have seen many species reappear out of the natural seed bank. Examples of this are sorrel, yarrow, native red clover, plantain, birds for trefoil, cocksfoot, as well as many other wildflowers and delicates. All this is from one season, from animals being set stocked to animals being moved regularly at high densities, exactly as they do in the wild by predation. So livestock are the biological drivers of building high potential soils. And I like to think that a cow pat is a pile of beautiful, steaming, recycled biology. So as farmers and everyone, there's a lot to do and a lot more that can be done. But myself, along with a lot of my fellow farmers, we're operating in an industry where the margins are desperately tight, which in turn really hampers creativity and change, because there's very little room for error when experimenting and trying out new things on farm. You know, there's a lot more I'd like to be doing, but I have to take into account that risk. So on the farm here, what's our future plans? Well, I feel like there's a need to explore a joint venture, maybe a field scale veg growing. I need to do more monitoring our ecological process and recording this over time. And I think I need to reintroduce the ancient practice of agroforestry and wood pasture to the farm here. You know, trees, livestock and grass, everything happening in the same place. So the messages I'd like to share with you all today for the delegates who are watching and listening. These events are great to highlight issues, but I think there's been enough talk now over the last couple of years, and now is the time for doing and action. There are farmers out there who are doing great things. Go and meet them, support each other, and work towards achievable goals. And for the policymakers in the audience, recognize the importance of herbivores in enhancing ecosystem function. You know, this is an undeniable natural fact, and that's regardless of your dietary choices. Resist the temptation of being over elaborate. You know, we need simple solutions for tackling these wicked, complex problems. Keep it simple, keep it simple, keep it simple. Production and ecosystem service provision can and has to happen in the same place. And any environmental stewardship, I believe, must have ecosystem function at the core of its design. Do not micromanage for single species outcome, or you know, that simply doesn't work. So the farmers who are listening today, we have to take ownership of the issues that we are facing, and it's up to us to provide the solutions and take the lead with future land use policy. I think now is the time to influence. We've got to remember you are either at the table or on the menu, and I'd rather be on at the table. Livestock health and performance is a direct reflection of soil health, and diversity is key to building resilience. I believe the future of ruminant production should be less about horsepower, fertilizer and monocultures, and a lot more about harvesting free solar energy to feed soil microbes. And I'll just finish with what I started with, my main message to everyone, and that's the most profitable place to keep a cow is where nature thrives. So thanks very much, and I look forward to your questions. Cheers.
Thank you, Geraint. Lots of things to think about there. Some really good points. I'm sure lots of people at this event will have been talking about soil underpinning everything, but I like the sponge analogy with you know, the more organic matter, the more water holding capacity, etc., etc. I think that's a really important, simple message that we could share. I'm doing a really terrible job at keeping time, I'm afraid. So we're going to rattle straight on to our last speaker. So Meg is a final year veterinary biosciences student at Aberystwyth University, following the completion of a year in industry working as a McDonald's progressive young farmer in conjunction with Avara Foods and Cargill's. She's also a keen member of Brecknockshire Young Farmers. Meg was due to come into Welsh Water for a short knowledge exchange placement earlier in the year, but unfortunately that has not been able to happen due to COVID. But I was keen that we still kind of carried on the relationship with YFC, and I was really happy that Meg was able to come along today. And I thought it was important to make sure that the next generation is part of this discussion. And I asked Meg for her thoughts on whether her peers, for example, were aware of the situation around farming and water. So Meg, over to you.
Hello all. Firstly, thank you for inviting me to come and speak here today. Just to sort of reiterate what Dave has just said, you are getting an insight here into a university student's bedroom, as I'm currently by the seaside in Aberystwyth, as I'm a final year student reading veterinary bioscience at the institute. So a bit about my background is this year my weeks revolve around online lectures and struggling with the statistical analysis which is associated with my dissertation, and making sure I'm tucked up in bed before just after that 10 o'clock curfew. My life was very different last year as I closed the books and undertook a year in industry working for McDonald's agricultural team as a progressive young farmer. For those who are unaware, the Progressive Young Farmer is a programme run by McDonald's where you have a 12-month work placement, be it in your sort of parachuted into one of McDonald's supply chains. So I was placed within the poultry integrator of RF Foods and Cargill Protein Europe, and I was mainly based in the West Midlands. So as you can imagine, being within the poultry sector, and especially being based with a large majority of our farms being in the Wye catchment area, water quality was quite high on our sustainability agenda. And as I said, a keen member of Young Farmers, and this is one of the main reasons I took up the 2-week placement with Welsh Water, was to learn more about this topic. So when I was sort of first asked to be on this panel, I was ecstatic. As someone who regularly sort of attends conferences like these, I'm often in awe of the experts who sit on these panels, and my fellow panelists today are no exception. And to be in this position is something I often aim for. However, when the glee of being asked and the sort of the wave of stardom died down, I thought about what I was going to say during my 15-minute slot. And I then thought about how often has water quality come up as a topic within my degree, or how often has it come up in my short career in general, or how often have I heard the conversation starter, so what's your opinion on water quality? And the truth be told, that it's not that often. Now, I can't stress this enough. If you'd asked me about sustainability within the agricultural sector, water quality would have been there, but it would not have had as much significance as it deserved. And if you'd asked me 12 months ago before my placement, it's still, if I hadn't done my placement, it'd still be in the same position in my sort of scale of importance. So this was the main reason I applied for this 2-week placement with Welsh Water, just to learn more about the general topic of water sustainability. It was, as I say, it was a topic I was aware of, but perhaps a little bit ignorant to. But then I posed the question to myself of whether it was just me and the peers on my course or within my YFC or within the rural community were much more attuned to the issue. Therefore, I did a bit of data collection. So let me set the scene. It was another wild Saturday student night out in Aberystwyth. The tea was brewing in the pot and my friends and I were settling down for an evening of Strictly Come Dancing with a packet of hobnobs. Wild, I know. However, in between Bill Bailey's street dance and Jamie Lang's questionable salsa, we discussed the uncharted topic of water quality. On my panel for the evening was an Irish biology student, a zoology master's student hailing from the Peak District, a geography student from central Manchester, and our resident beef farming agricultural student from Carmarthen. A diverse panel, to say the least. So we started with something easy. I asked them, what do you know about the association between water quality and food production? The geography student said she felt there wasn't a strong connection, and if there was, it never really come up in her degree. And it definitely wasn't a concern of hers while she was living in central Manchester. I then asked her as a consumer, and she said it's nothing which had even crossed her mind as she was browsing the aisles. However, it was fair to say the agricultural student definitely had something to comment. She said it happens, and while she was aware and concerned about the issue, she was equally aware that some farmers weren't. She felt the penalties were severe to small farming enterprises, but some factory farms were willing to take the hit and probably even factored it into their cost of production. I asked my panel how they felt about that approach, and their general consensus was probably very similar to yours today, appalled. My panel agreed that these attitudes were outdated and showed little to no regard to the future generations. But I asked why, what was the problem, and how did we ensure that when we're running the show per se, we didn't hold these damaging practices or negative opinions and they weren't allowed to filter down to future generations? With the majority of our information, which we as agricultural entrants absorb, coming from the industry, whether it's farmer organisations or what we hear down the pub, or in the majority of cases, mum and dad, how are we making sure we're getting the correct and positive messages out to us? The zoology student had studied 4 land management courses in the 3 years of her degree, with water quality being heavily focused on in the majority of them. Food production was portrayed in a negative light, with a particular focus being shone on negative, irresponsible fertiliser usage. And she said, as a consumer, sustainability, which encompassed water conservation, was something which influenced her buying habits, but probably would more in the future, as today, as a student, price will always be king. So moving towards the Irish biology student, he was torn between his head and his heart. From a biological perspective, the science behind the issue was clear. In vitro, incidences of pollutions happen, but sometimes there were results of perfect storms. But these were happening far too often now. However, with a commercial farm at home, he felt productivity had to come first. So as you can tell from what I've just said then, we had a diverse range of views towards the topic. So now speaking from my experiences within the poultry industry, an environmental group released an article showing concerns over the association between the frequent and reoccurring algae bloom in the Wye and the planning and positioning of poultry farms in its catchment. Now, I'm in no position to support or condemn this article. However, when I tried to find the original article last week, I couldn't, but I found numerous articles of farmers hitting back and the poultry industry's anger over the portrayal of the topic in the original article. Now, working for a significant poultry integrator, we received pressure from our customers to investigate this issue. Enter the agricultural placement student. I updated the phosphate usage project for the company, on behalf of the company, for our customers. I sampled litter from over 100 farms, I think it was more 150 by the end, tested the feed produced on the company, which was fed to our birds, and produced a questionnaire about the use of poultry manure as an organic fertiliser. I was honestly expecting, knowing how much my father struggles to use his mobile phone, I was expecting to be chasing producers and struggling to get engagement. However, I could not be more wrong. The responses I received were positive, and I had producers ringing me at all hours of the day, wanting to discuss the issue further. So there was clear engagement. No one likes being told that they're having an adverse effect on the environment, and everyone was willing to play their part, but to a point. The impression I got was somewhere there was a fine line. Less chicken produced means less poultry manure requiring for disposal and being spread on land. Simple solve, right? However, I was told by one farmer how much he loved the Wye. One of his fondest memories was disappearing as a child down the Wye with his siblings, and he planned to go down the river later this weekend on a kayak with his eldest. Yet, despite his emotions and desperation to protect something which was so important to him, it wasn't going to put food on his table, and it certainly wasn't going to put food on anyone else's. However, with articles being produced by the press which has compared the Wye to the colour of pea soup, it's becoming an issue for the consumer, which then becomes an issue to the retailer, then to the processor, and I have no doubt that it will fall more heavily on the doorsteps of producers in the future. That's a lot of linking the chain, but that means that it's going to fall on my doorstep one day. And as someone who is entering the industry, I want to get ahead of the game. In my eyes, I'm going to use the classic analogy of sustainability being a three-legged stool, with the 3 legs being economical, social, and environmental. Without 3 equal legs, you're not going to have a very comfortable sit. So unless you intend on making one of the shorter legs longer, you're going to have to start shaving down one of the longer ones. And I think that is the easiest way to explain the symbiotic relationship between environment and productivity, sort of as Geraint mentioned in his speech previously. Do you think that as agricultural entrants, we are being given the tool to lengthen that leg and making sure that we're having a nice, stable balance between these 3 key factors? And if we are going to be given the tools, do you think mum and dad are going to listen? Now, a direct quote from my mother: "There are no problems in this world, only solutions waiting to happen." But speaking from this perspective of the younger generation, I think the initial problem is so many people are unaware of what the key problem is, and therefore are really failing to find a one concise solution, which should relatively be simple. So education is key, but as I previously said, this is multifactorial, and finger pointing is not going to solve the issue, but we don't talk about it. Water quality shouldn't be a token message at the beginning of one of my lectures. It should be a key module about sustainable food production. And perhaps if the agricultural student, the veterinary bioscientist, the biologist, the geographer, and the zoologist can pool our expertise and opinions over Brew and Strictly, but hopefully that's a conversation and collaboration we can continue into the future. However, we still have a long way to go on our journey, and the sort of future of water sustainability is still firmly in the elder generation's hands. And I've probably only scratched the surface of the different aspects of water quality. But in summary, water is water. Whether it comes from a water source in the Alps, sold in a glass bottle, a 35p bottle from the snacks section of Aldi, or the kitchen tap which is linked up to the borehole in the field. There is no vegan substitute or luxury range, and it's potentially the most fundamental need every human has, but no one talks about it. And in my eyes, it's something worth protecting. So I was taught to leave your audience before your audience leaves you, and I hope you're all still there. However, I encourage not everyone, not just farmers, just to think responsibility, just to think about how you responsibly use water. And the quote, "Do as I say and not as I do," springs to mind. And despite my parents disagreeing, I do listen. So my takeaway message would be have the conversation, engage with an agricultural entrant about water quality, and set examples of sustainable practice which you would wish an agricultural entrant to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Meg. Great. Lots of interesting things to unpick there again. I've just been slightly distracted by the chat box where it looks like Geraint has just talked himself into being a demonstration farm, so he may be regretting that. I think one of the important messages from Meg's presentation there was that water is not included, perhaps to the level it should be, in education, and maybe that is something that should be tackled a bit more head on. How do we get that on the agenda a bit more? David is looking through the questions for me at the moment, but just on that first point, maybe back to Geraint on that one. Do you think, Geraint, that there's space for a bit more of this in education?
Yeah, I suppose it's been a while since I was in school. Is the water cycle still taught? Maybe we should teach the carbon cycle as well. I think as well coming, in agricultural college as well and further education with land-based education. I think there is a need for more of an agroecological approach, I think, now to education, and then that influence those minds young, and then things will happen great at a later date.
Yeah, no, I agree. Thank you for that. Just picking up another question that came in earlier about the importance of advice and advisors and support. This was a question that's been posed to Lisa specifically. You talked about the importance of advisors, Lisa, but I think what is important, as has been included in the question, is the background and the experience of that person providing the advice. I wonder if you had any more to add to that point.
Yeah, for us, it's the advisors within Natural England. We've had advisors in the past who are really good, understand the schemes obviously inside out, which has been a bit harder more recently. But I think what's hard is the advisors need to understand farming as well. Some of them, they just have the environmental background, and don't necessarily understand the farming background as well, but particularly in reference to as well the new schemes going forward. having those advisors that are there and get to know the farmers, get to know their land, so a farmer can ring up and say, you know, maybe they've got an issue or an idea or something and how it fits in with the scheme. Previously, advisors would be able to talk straight away, but now they're not allowed access to those advisors. They have to go through a hub and then it gets passed on and so on. So there's sort of two elements there. There's the advisors for the scheme and other advisors with that joint agricultural and environmental knowledge, which is getting harder to find.
Yeah, I think I agree with all that. I mean, there was quite a debate in Wales. So in the last Welsh Government consultation, I was part of them at the time, we talked about the importance of advisory support in future. And I think it's fair to say that was one of the kind of the most, that was one of the issues that garnered the most attention as to who are these advisors, where are they coming from, what skills will they have, and will the advice be consistent across the area? So I think that was a really important message that a lot of people picked up on. Thanks for that. Geraint, I'm going to come back to you again. As you were going through your Nuffield experience, but before and after that, did you feel that there was advice available to support the things that you wanted to undertake, or did you very much rely on going about that yourself?
Yeah, I think it depends on what type of character you are, and that I've probably never been that good at taking advice, so I've rather gone out there and it's either been a huge success or a complete disaster, but I've probably learned as much from either. What I would say, I think there's what we can't do. We can't have a top heavy level of administration that's soaking up a huge amount of funds, where then the actual work on the ground can't be afforded. So I'd like to see. I think there should be farmer designed, farmer driven, and farmer led, because that's the only way that we're going to be empowered again and take responsibility, and you know, that'll do a huge amount for the farming population.
Brilliant, thank you. David, can you see? Are there any more questions coming in, David? I can't see back through the history of the chat box.
There was a question right at the beginning about exporting water to England, but given it's there, but
oh, that was Powell's cheeky question to me, wasn't it, about water prices?
I'm quite intrigued though. A lot of this, or some of this, comes with engagement with farmers, and I was quite intrigued by Lisa's comments. She referred specifically to field sports, farming and shooting there, but of course different stakeholders in the landscape will have very strong and different views on this. There are other management techniques, burning for example, where there are positive benefits for the wildlife, but again, there might be a strong reaction against it. I'm just wondering how you reconcile and balance this engagement with farmers, with communicating with the public.
It's been a very hot topic, and sort of shooting on our estate generally has not been easy. We've been targeted by anti-shooting groups to stop it, but it is a legal activity, and we are working with them to do joint work, and they're signed up with it. Like our first farm at Humberston, that's a shoot that own the sporting rights over that land. They're not a tenant, but we have a tripartite agreement between us, cooperation agreement between the three of us, that will all work together to deliver Beyond Nature. So they're working with us on the grip blocking and so on. Burning has been another hot topic, and for us at Yorkshire Water, we think some of the research has shown that some of the burning activities has a detrimental effect on water quality. So looking at alternative methods, although some of the legislation and changes that are coming through on some of our SSSI land are sort of dictating that as well. But I think, like with everything on these, it's just communication between all of you, sharing information, and don't just go off and do something on a land and not tell the farmer, and vice versa. But yeah, collaboration and talking is number one, is key.
Another question I have here for Lisa, but it would apply to everyone, would be what's the sort of level of influence do you find with regard to equitable prices for farmers?
It's something new, but we're just wondering whether we can use the Beyond Nature brand to help our tenants get that sort of more equitable price. And for sometimes it's that story or just the knowledge behind how that food was produced. But by buying that produce and supporting that farmer, you're also supporting, you know, WRFFC habitats or pollinators, tree planting, carbon storage, you know, climate change mitigation works and so on. So it's telling the story and getting consumers to understand more, and that, you know, for instance, this thing that people think that they're doing their bit for climate change because they stopped eating meat, you know, and regardless, you know, not rather than looking at what sort of meat they're buying, and actually buying and eating meat that could be having a really positive effect on carbon and land management and biodiversity and so on. So yeah, it's education. Our first farm, Humberston, they've got a contract with Marks and Spencer's to provide Marks and Spencer's with their Swaledale lamb. And recently, just in the last couple of weeks ago, we were approached by a company spending £1 billion on food annually for corporate events, wanting to become more sustainable. So once we start getting out and known and talking to people, it's using these contacts to try and then help people like that. If somebody's spending £1 billion a year on food, making sure that they get the food from the right places.
I mean, that is actually a vehicle for, if we can communicate clearly, it's a benefit to the public at large and to the farmers. And I do feel sometimes people don't always realise they are actually on the same side, but
yeah.
Yes. On that note, I feel I've got to wrap up, I'm afraid. Sorry to cut it short there, and I do apologise for my timekeeping earlier on, so we've had to cut the questions short quite significantly. I'd like to thank everyone again. So Meg, Geraint and Lisa, thank you very much for your time and your efforts this afternoon. Thanks to David for helping me out and the conference team. Thank you to everybody else who's attended. I hope it's been interesting and I hope you enjoyed the rest of the conference. I've taken away some really important messages in that last session about the education, about the optimization of different outcomes, the comments that Geraint was making about metrics and his sponge. I think that's a really good analogy. I'll be using that going forward. But no, thank you once again, everybody. Diolch yn fawr and goodbye. Thank you very much.